Hi, I'm Annie Botticelli. Go to my website, aspiritualspark.com, to see a list of my current offerings and also to sign up for my free email newsletter, which makes you part of my community, and you get all the perks that go along with that. Today I want to talk about Mercury Retrograde. This is going to be a discussion about the general implications and the do's and don'ts of Mercury Retrograde and the shadow periods before and afterward. So you can look to your current horoscopes to see what sign Mercury might be retrograde in and how it might affect specific signs, but this is a talk about the global ramifications of Mercury retrograde and the general do's and don'ts. But even though it's general, the information is powerful, and you're definitely going to want to master this cycle because we experience this almost half of our lives. 3 to 4 times a year, Mercury goes retrograde, and there's a period of time before Mercury goes retrograde where we experience similar energies as if Mercury was retrograde, and then that's called the shadow period, pre-shadow period, and then there's a period of time afterwards called post-shadow period where we're also still experiencing the energy of the retrograde. So all in all, this is about 8 to 9 weeks, 3 to 4 times a year that this is happening. So the more you really understand what the energy is trying to show us, what is good to do, how you can use this to benefit yourself, and what things to not do so you don't make yourself crazy like you're banging your head up against a wall every time this happens, you want to really master this, and that's what this video is all about. Okay, so we're going to talk about do's and don'ts. A little bit more background on the retrograde cycle. Mercury's retrograde for about 2.5 to 3 weeks at a time, and the period of time before, about 2.5 to 3 weeks before it goes retrograde, called the pre-shadow period, you will see very strong effects as if Mercury were actually retrograde. So the way, and the same thing with afterwards, it's a little bit lighter in the post-shadow period after you get over the initial several days of awkwardness from it going direct. With every day that it gets closer to being out of the shadow period, there's more and more clarity. So in that way, the post-shadow period is a little bit easier or mild compared to the pre-shadow period, but the effects are still present. So, and this is why. If you imagine a planet, now of course we know planets don't really go backwards. So the idea of retrograde, meaning we use the terminology, Mercury is going backwards, and that is not true. Mercury and none of the other planets ever go backwards in their orbits. They have their orbits, their regular orbits, they only move forward in their orbits. But everything in astrology is from our perspective. It's our perspective of how we see things in the sky affects how we experience things in our lives. So if you were to track a planet going retrograde in the sky, it would be looking like it was moving backwards in its orbit, even though it technically isn't. Okay, so that's what a retrograde is about. But if you imagine that you are going 60 miles an hour and you realize you have to make a U-turn, and so you start that process of slowing down from 60 miles an hour to 0 miles an hour to make that turn, that is like the energy of the pre-shadow period. You're not quite stalled out to turn around, but you're slowing down. It's awkward. You were flowing, things were flowing, you were moving quickly, everything is moving forward, and there's just this awkwardness, and that is what it's like in the pre-shadow period. Then the retrograde time is that time of just kind of turning around, and then the post-shadow period is about, now you have to pick up more speed from completely slowing down, and every minute that passes you get more and more back to your 60 mile an hour speed. So that's what a retrograde very much reminds me of in feeling. So there are certain things that it's not indicated to do during this time. Mercury rules communication and transportation. So when it's not at its full speed or there's awkwardness in its movement, making forward movements specifically on things involving communication, agreements, transportation is not indicated. So let's talk about some examples here. In general, on our list of do not do during Mercury retrograde is do not launch new things. If you have something brand new you're excited about, you have this great idea, you have your life's work that you want to present to the world, you've been working on a project, the Mercury retrograde is not the time to launch it for many reasons. It doesn't have the full steam of communication or expression. So what it is good to do during Mercury retrograde is to, anything with re, basically the rule of Mercury retrograde, and really all retrogrades, is to put the prefix re before, and pretty much any word that you can come up with. I'm sure there will be exceptions, but most words that you come up with reconsider, reassess, renegotiate, rest, R-E-S-T, rest, those are going to redo, rediscuss, whatever you can add re in front of is going to be what you want to do. You want to go back over things. You want to go over things from the past. All retrogrades also very much remind me of the earthworm. If you ever look at Ted Andrews' work, he talks about many things, but specifically he talks about animal energies and what the animals are teaching us. And the energy of the earthworm is going back over old ground to make very rich soil for the future crops. So the earthworm just goes back over the same soil, but it turns the soil into this very fine, rich, fertile soil. And that's what the energy of the retrograde really wants to bring in our lives, is this going back over things. So if you're not proactively going back over things, the universe will give you opportunities. And sometimes those opportunities that come up don't feel like opportunities because they're super annoying. But if you reframe it and you look at it like, this is an opportunity to help me create fertile soil to plant the future crops of my life, to be more bountiful, then you can change your experience of Mercury retrograde. So it is indicated to go back over old projects. So you don't want to launch new projects, but you do want to work on or finish old projects. You want to breathe life into old ideas. You want to try things on. You want to play with things from the past. You want to dust off old ideas, old situations, and look at them again. Now, the universe is going to bring up any problems or patterns that are negative from the past. So you pretty much guaranteed, if you have someone you argue with things about, there's like, say, your partner or a business partner or a family member, that same old thing that seems to always come up is always going to come up during Mercury retrograde, because you have a chance to look at this again and do something different with it. That is the point. The point is that you have to suffer. It's not the point that you have to suffer every time this happens. The point is you look at it from a different angle. You do work on this particular pattern or issue, and then you bring it up to a higher state of resolution. Okay, so the summary there: don't launch new things. Do breathe life into old things, work on them, play with them. Big rule during Mercury retrograde: do not sign contracts or make verbal agreements or any life-altering decisions, really. You don't have all the information when Mercury is retrograde. You're not sure, you're vacillating, even if you seem very, very solid in something at one moment. Circumstances or your thoughts or something's going to bring you back to reconsider what you thought you were very staunchly solid on. So you do want to reconsider, reassess, renegotiate, bring things back up. So let's say you own a home and you've been considering refinancing. So the retrograde time is not the best time to sign the paperwork for the refinance, because there's more of a chance that you're not going to see something in the fine print that later is going to bite you in the butt. But it is a good time to contact companies that do refis, get educated on what the current rates are, do comparison shopping, see what your different picture, your financial picture would look like if you refinanced, assess the pros and cons. The retrograde is awesome for that. It's great for research. Okay, so other things it's not good to do is initiate things, period. We talked about not launching new things, but the energy of just initiating something new. If you can initiate something new without a big, if the stakes aren't very high, then it doesn't have to be a big deal. But even things that you buy in Mercury retrograde, even if they're not very expensive, you'll find that you have to take them back. It's the wrong size. Your size changes within a couple of months. You decide you don't like it. It gets lost or something. Things that you buy new during retrograde usually wind up, something goes on with them. But again, if you're not spending a lot of money on them, the stakes aren't really that high. But you will see, as you pay attention, that things you buy during Mercury retrograde have a higher chance of being lost, broken, different, turn out different than you think they're going to be, and have a shorter shelf life than you think that they will. That's why in general, you definitely do not want to make big purchases. It's probably a good idea to just avoid making any unnecessary purchases at all. But like I said, the ones you really have to be careful of are the ones that have the higher stakes, which are the big purchases. Or if you don't have a lot of money and $20 is a lot to you, you don't want to spend money on something because it's not going to be what you think it's going to be. But it is a great time to comparison shop. Okay, so don't make big purchases, do comparison shop. Okay, so what happens if you absolutely have to buy a phone or a computer or a car during the time that Mercury is in retrograde or in the shadow period? This is going to come up, so I definitely want to address this, because if you can avoid doing it, just hold off, borrow a car or a computer or something during the retrograde cycle, that would be ideal, or rent a car or go to an internet cafe or something. That would be ideal, but there are going to be many circumstances where your phone blows up and you need to have a phone, your car blows up and you need to have a car, or something like that. So these are the things that you can implement that will make this more smooth for you. If you have to buy a phone or a computer, make sure you keep your packaging and your receipts, because many of the things, I know phones in particular, if you're going to return a phone for any reason, and the odds are that you are going to have to return a phone that you just got and then get another one, you have to have the same boxes, you have to have the same packaging. There's a lot of stipulations as to what you need to return it. So you want to be clear on what the return policy is, really crystal clear about what you need to do in the chance that something happens. Keep track of your receipt, keep track of the paperwork, keep track of the box and the packaging. And definitely know how long you have until to do something about it. You might even want to mark it on your calendar so that it's easily findable for you. But keep the receipt somewhere where you can access it easily, so that if it turns up, you've got 2 days to deal with it and you're trying to find the receipt, that you're not in that situation. If you have to buy either of these things, then definitely get insurance on them. If there's some kind of additional insurance that you can get that protects the device, you want to have that, because the odds that you're going to need it are greater. And you want to be clear about what you're getting with the insurance as well, reading the fine print, etc. You also want to, let's see, if there's extra support or an extended warranty, something like that, then you might want to consider getting the additional warranty and or extended warranty, because sometimes you might be covered for something for 3 months. But the Mercury retrograde cycle very commonly has things come up in the first several weeks or first couple of months, but a lot of times it's 4 to 6 months before something turns up from that cycle. So you want to make sure you have coverage then, and even further into the distance, in case something small was showing up and then it turns out to be a bigger problem than it seemed. If you have to buy a car when Mercury's in retrograde, try to avoid buying from an individual, because there's no way to hold the individual liable in case they're not telling you something. If you have to buy from an individual, definitely pay whatever amount it costs to get an inspection from a professional, well-reviewed mechanic who does those kind of things, to tell you what you're going to be getting yourself into, so that they can find things that they wouldn't have found. I made this recommendation for someone who would have normally never done anything like pay for the mechanic, and they did it, and this car they were so excited about turned out that it would be the biggest disaster of their life if they would have bought this car. But because they did this simple thing, which was paying for the mechanic, it worked out for them. And then they wound up having to pay a second time for the mechanic for the car they actually did purchase, but it was so much better, and the car they got was actually a really good car, even though they had to buy it during the cycle. And there were certain things that came up, but they were better able to prepare for them, and it wasn't a total lemon, which is what you really want to protect yourself from. Another idea is to try to buy from a certified used division of a dealership, because often they'll have certain guarantees for the workmanship and repairs, and that you're more protected. And you can also buy extended warranties in situations like that. I don't know if there's coverage available if you buy a car from an individual to have warranties in effect or something, but you can research that and just do the best you can to cover yourself, because the odds that you're going to need it are much increased during this time. Also, you might consider getting extra insurance on the car, or being very clear on what insurance is covered, or what is covered with the insurance that you get. Most people don't find out that they're not covered for something really important until that thing happens, and then they're like, oh man, I wish I were covered for that, or I wish I would have known. So this is the time where you really want to research, what are you covered for, and what are the situations where you'd wish you had different coverage, and then really weighing that. Something, you can look into extra glass coverage or having a zero deductible for glass coverage. This is a lesson I learned when I had eclipses hitting in my third house, which rules transportation, and I had a series of bizarre things with my car. And that's one of the things I learned, is that I had a $500 deductible for window problems. And if I would have gotten an inspection through my insurance company, which didn't cost anything to get the inspection, then it would have been just for a couple of extra dollars to my premium, I would have had zero deductible for glass coverage. So things like that, if you implement them, then as things come up, which they likely will, then you'll be better prepared to handle them gracefully. So keep your receipts, keep the packaging, get your warranties, do extra inspections, and also just expect that things are going to come up, and try to do whatever you can so that when those things come up, they can be things that are not a big deal and just kind of par for the course. You also want to make sure you don't commit to a new relationship. You can see the theme here. Don't do new things, but there's different ways that can look, and so I want to bring up different ways that can manifest. So let's say you meet someone in the retrograde shadow period. You've never heard of them before, they've never heard of you before, you've never met them, you've never been acquainted with them. And they come into your life and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the love of my life, or I'm going to get married, or I'm going to move forward in a huge way. Don't do that, because there's a very good chance that you're going to see them differently when the retrograde is finished. Now, there are always situations where there are superseding transits in someone's chart that can supersede any of these general implications, but in some way they're always going to show up. I did see a situation where, and this I'm sure happens all the time, where someone met a person who turned out to be the love of their life in Mercury retrograde, and they were concerned about that because, wow, it seems like it's the right person, but Mercury's in retrograde. A couple of weeks in, they figured out they had actually met that person before. It was slight, it was quick, it was at a party, they were in costume, and so it wasn't a new meeting. It felt like a new meeting, but it wasn't a new meeting, and so they are together long term, and they are not affected by the implications from starting a new relationship in Mercury retrograde the way that they would have been if they didn't know each other at all. So there's always little ways that things can get around these big do's and don'ts. So you want to leave a little room, or leave a lot of room for intuition as well, and just be aware. These do's and don'ts aren't meant to polarize you or make something be very rigid. They're things to just be aware of. I always talk about with astrology the example of being stuck on a deserted beach island. I guess all the islands have beaches on them. But anyway, if you're on this island and you're trying to get off of the island and you make this boat, you don't launch your boat when the tide is coming in. You're not going to get off the island that way. You're going to go right back to the island. You want to launch the boat when the tide is going out. And that is what using astrological awarenesses can really bring into your life. They're not be-all, end-alls. There are things that will absolutely show up, and the more you look for the relevance is going to be there. But leave a little bit of room around these things and just watch them for yourself. The more you watch for yourself and study them, the more you'll start to see how these different caveats will come up. Okay, so something it's important to not do is to be terrified and do nothing. People when they start to see the truth of how these energies manifest in their lives, sometimes you get paralyzed and say, oh, I don't want to do anything because I don't know what to do. Definitely don't do that. You have to live, you have to go on with your life, and there are so many things it's good to do. Just try to redirect the energy and watch the energy and let it lead you. If you're working on a project and you're having a lot of trouble with it, I have Aries rising, so I often have had to learn these lessons the hard way, even though I've known better. My Aries energy wants me to push forward anyway. It's very, forward moving. And so I remember this particular Mercury retrograde where I was writing a new book, and I was having all kinds of technological problems, and I was going to push through them, and I was going to get this done. And then eventually something happened, and my whole book got deleted. It completely disappeared. And so Spirit was saying, hello, I was knocking, but I didn't get it. And then it said, okay, you're not supposed to be focusing on this right now. And I later came to find out that I didn't have the pieces that I needed to really do this book the way I wanted to. And those pieces came at another point. That's why Spirit didn't want me to focus on that. But if you follow the energy, it's going to show you what you're supposed to be doing and what you're not supposed to be doing. That is a huge lesson. So if you feel like you're banging your head up against something, that is generally not the time to force things and push them through. If you're a person who has achieved many things through brute force, this isn't the time to do it that way. This is the time to sit back and watch the energies and to follow the flow. So there's a lot of examples like that. So you don't want to be afraid and do nothing. You just want to follow the energy. Now, some things that it's really great to do is to clean things out, to deal with clutter, to do house cleaning, to go through old files, to go back over old things. You know, basically that's the whole point. Some things to look out for when you do that: if there's certain very emotionally charged things that you might regret getting rid of, you might want to make piles of things to get rid of, things to consider getting rid of, and really just low-hanging fruit. I call them, like, just, you know, like recycling, or things that you're not going to make a huge mistake by getting rid of them in the retrograde, you know, that they're just kind of no-brainers. But the things that could have charge or you could reconsider, make piles in your garage or some other room with them, and then when the energies are more clear, when it's direct, you can reassess some of the items and see if some of them have to get pulled back in, you know, to your house, because that you are in danger of having that happen if you just go crazy and start cleaning things out in the name of retrograde, that you're not thinking completely clearly and you're making big decisions about certain things to be let go of that maybe you'll later regret. So just look out for that little caveat involved with clearing things out. And let's see. Okay, so you don't want to miss an opportunity. I often have people write and post asking questions about taking a new job when Mercury is in retrograde. That is something that comes up all the time. If you have an opportunity and you need a job and you need the money and it seems like a great idea, it's not that you shouldn't take the opportunity. That's why you have to really feel into this. It's just take the opportunity knowing several things. The first is that if you are going to have to sign paperwork, try to put it off till it's direct, because certain things might not be included in what you're signing, and on further researching, you might want to change certain things or ask for certain things to be part of what you're agreeing to. It's the first thing. Second thing is you don't have the whole story, so it's likely not going to be what you think it's going to be. But that doesn't have to be bad. You could also start a job in Mercury retrograde, and then in 6 months you get promoted and you don't have that job anymore, but you're still working for the same company. So then you wouldn't have wanted to miss that opportunity, even though your job had a shorter shelf life than you thought it was going to. You know, there's things like that where it shows up, where it's not necessarily a bad thing. You just have to be aware. If you go into something thinking, this is my life's work, I'm going to do this, and this is it, this is all it, it's probably not going to be, because it's in Mercury retrograde. You know, so you just have to take that into consideration. So if it involves a huge move that's very stressful that you're kind of not sure about, those would be the things to maybe consider not taking. If things change, would you still be wanting to have made that decision? You know, so you have to kind of weigh those possibilities. If, again, like I said, it's a no-brainer, these certain things that are just no-brainers, like you don't have a job, you need a job, it's right by your house, there's not really any huge problem, or you're not sacrificing anything to really get the job, then take the job, you know? So the other thing that it's really not good to do is to make rigid plans. So for instance, let's say you teach classes, and this is a little bit of a tricksy one, that's why I'm bringing this up, because Mercury retrograde is an awesome time to study things, and it's an awesome time to take classes about something that you've been interested in. It's also a great time to teach classes. However, it often winds up different than you think it's going to be, and 20 people may register and 10 people may show up. The odds of that happening are higher when you teach a class when Mercury's in retrograde than if Mercury weren't retrograde, because people's circumstances change, they get new information that becomes relevant to whether they can attend the class or not. So, you know, if you're going to teach a class, you might want to make a decision to make it no refunds and, you know, give them a playback of the class, or set yourself up in a way where if people's lives change, it doesn't affect your life as much. There's always the chance that you might wish that you didn't schedule the class because something comes up that you would like to go to, you know? So that's why, just from a planning purpose, people's plans are going to be changing right and left, including your own. So when you're planning something, anything, a date, an appointment, you'll notice you definitely want to write in pencil in your planner. Hopefully you already do. But in that period of time, things are going to change constantly. People are going to break appointments. People are going to make new appointments. It's going to shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. So if you can just be flexible with your plans, then it doesn't matter. Then you can plan freely. You can plan fearlessly. And that's what we want to focus on. And so this brings me to the topic of travel plans. Very, very huge question. I have it happen all the time. Uh-oh, I'm planning a trip in Mercury retrograde. What do I do? Okay, so Mercury retrograde is actually a fantastic time to travel. Mercury rules traveling, and especially going back to some place that feels like home, or back to some place that you love, or back to some place that you lived before, that you visited before, revisiting something. It can be very much indicated. A lot of people find that this opportunities come up in this way, and it's fine to take advantage of those things. Again, things to just be aware of is that if you're planning a trip for when Mercury's in retrograde, or, you know, within the shadows, or you're in the shadow or in Mercury retrograde planning a trip for when Mercury's not in retrograde, it still has the same effect. So I have had people write many times and say, Mercury's in retrograde, but I'm planning a trip for when Mercury's not in retrograde, so I'm okay, right? And it's not that you're not okay either way. You are okay either way, but you don't want to buy tickets that are non-refundable or that have a huge change fee, because the odds of you having your tickets, wanting to change your tickets or your trip altogether or your itinerary are really high. There's a really strong chance that something is different about the plans that you make. So just add some flexibility in there. If you have this 1 week in a year and you have to leave on this certain date, you have to get back on this certain day, it's not best to plan those trips, if you can help it, during Mercury retrograde because of the rigidity. If it really has to be rigid like that, the flow is very often going to have there be a snowstorm and you can't get back when you thought you were going to, or you miss your flight, or something like that is increased. Also, the chance of your luggage being lost is increased, so it's always better to not check baggage, but to take carry-ons when Mercury is in retrograde. Also, the chance for your gate changing at the last second and it being completely across the other side of the airport and down and up and around somewhere else, the odds of that happening are significantly increased during this retrograde time. And so you want to have your wits about you. You don't want to be on your phone or device just like passing the time, not paying attention, because it's going to make it more likely that you are running and hopefully making your flight. This happens all the time in general. It happens more when the retrogrades are happening. If you're taking a road trip and you have flexibility, awesome. That is wonderful. Some things to note. You want to make sure your car is in awesome working order. You want to get everything checked, double checked. If you have a hunch or a feeling about something, you have to follow through with that. You want to have all the things you might need for roadside assistance in gear in your car accessible. You want to have your insurance card accessible in case you need some assistance. The odds of something coming up are increased when you're on a trip. That's part of why the rigidity doesn't work, because if you have to be at a certain place at a certain time and you have this many hours to get there, the odds that it's going to take you this many hours is not going to happen. Last year I took a trip where I was driving across the country. I do this often. And I thought the trip was going to take 4 days, and the trip took like a couple of weeks. And it was awesome and it was fine. But because it was in retrograde, I knew that, so I didn't schedule anything in either direction, because the leaving date changed, the arriving date changed, but the journey was wonderful because the flexibility was there. It would have been super stressful if I had to be somewhere. If you have to be somewhere, then it shadows, it covers, it colors the whole time, and that's when you can have the negative effects that people talk about with Mercury retrograde. But if you know this beforehand and you leave the flexibility, then it's awesome, you know? So, oh, we're gonna leave this day or somewhere around that. Oh, we're gonna get there and maybe do this. Your itineraries are going to change. That also happened in that trip I just mentioned. So Mercury retrograde is a magical time, and it has magical opportunities. And the more you do bring flexibility and awareness, the more you can go through these times and actually start to look forward to them. I've gotten to the point now where I actually start to look forward to Mercury retrograde, because I'm kind of on full throttle all the time, and many people are, where they're just kind of charging it all the time. And so now I know that you can't do that when Mercury's in retrograde. So I get to rest. And the more you rest when Mercury's in retrograde, then when you have your nice open pocket of launching time, when you get back into clear energy, then you have all this clarity and all this strength that can go behind the things that you push forward, instead of going crazy during that time and then trying to launch something and being all disjointed. That, that energy doesn't feel good and doesn't manifest very well, and it's not graceful, and it seriously affects your quality of experience. That's the best thing about astrology, is that you can improve the quality of your life experience by understanding the natural rhythms that are at play. So I would love for you to go to my website, aspiritualspark.com, where you can see a list of my current offerings. Also, definitely sign up for my free email newsletter and become part of my community and get all kinds of perks, including a monthly write-up that I do, a written version of some things that are coming for the month ahead, so that you can have it in more of a tangible place to make your plans and understand the energies and have more grace in your life. And I hope you have a wonderful Mercury retrograde. Bye.